So this is a story about how we know what we know. It's a story about this woman, Natalia Rybczynski. She's a paleobiologist, which means she specializes in digging up really old dead stuff.
Yeah, I had someone who called me Dr. Dead Things.
And I think she's particularly interesting because of where she digs that stuff up. Way above the Arctic Circle in the remote Canadian tundra. Now, one summer day in 2006, she was at a dig site called the Files Leaf Bed, which is less than 10 degrees latitude away from the magnetic North Pole.
Really, it's not going to sound very exciting because it was a day of walking with your backpack and your GPS and notebook and just picking up anything that might be a fossil.
And at some point, she noticed something.
Rusty, kind of rust-colored, about the size of the palm of my hand. It was just lying on the surface.
And at first she thought it was just a splinter of wood, because that's the sort of thing people had found at the Files Leaf Bed before, prehistoric plant parts. But that night, back at camp,
when I get out the hand lens, maybe I'm looking a little bit more closely and realizing it doesn't quite look like this has tree rings. Maybe it's a preservation thing, but it looks really like bone.
Huh. So over the next 4 years, she went to that spot over and over and eventually collected 30 fragments of that exact same bone. Most of them really tiny.
It's not a whole lot. It, fits in a small Ziploc bag.
And she tried to piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. But it was challenging.
It's broken up into so many little tiny pieces. I'm trying to use sand and putty, and it's not looking good. So finally we had a 3D surface scanner.
Ooh.
Yeah, right?
It turns out it was way easier to do it virtually.
It's kind of magical when it all fits together.
How certain were you that you had it right? Like that you would put it together in the right way? Like was there a potential that you put it together a different way and you have like a parakeet or something? was there?
No. No, we got this.
What she had, she discovered, was a tibia, a leg bone, and specifically one that belonged to a cloven-hoofed mammal. So something like a cow or a sheep, but it couldn't have been either of those. It was just too big.
The size of this thing, it was huge. It's a really big animal.
So what animal could it be? Having hit a wall, she showed one of the fragments to some colleagues of hers in Colorado, and they had an idea.
We took a saw and we nicked just the edge of it. And there was this really interesting, there's a smell that comes from it.
It smelled kind of like singed flesh. It was a smell that Natalia recognized from cutting up skulls in her gross anatomy lab. Collagen. Collagen is what gives structure to our bones, and usually, after so many years, it breaks down. But in this case, the Arctic had acted like a natural freezer and preserved it. Then a year or two later, Natalia was at a conference in Bristol, and she saw that a colleague of hers named Mike Buckley was demoing this new process that he called collagen fingerprinting. It turns out that different species have slightly different structures of collagen. So if you get a collagen profile of an unknown bone, you can compare it to those of known species, and who knows, maybe you get a match. So she shipped him one of the fragments, FedEx.
Yeah, you want to track it. It's kind of important.
And he processed it and compared it to 37 known and modern-day mammal species, and he found a match. It turns out that the 3.5 million year old bone that Natalia had dug out of the high Arctic belonged to a camel.
And I'm thinking, what? That's amazing, right? If it's true.
So they tested a bunch of the fragments, and they got the same result for each one. But however, based on the size of the bone that they found was such that it meant that this camel was 30% larger than modern-day camels. So this camel would have been about 9 feet tall, weighed around a ton. Yeah, Natalia had found a giant Arctic camel.